Hello and welcome to this vlog where I'm going to assess my coaching process. We're going to talk about different aspects of my way of coaching, touching on different topics, which will include the use of language, feedback, and relationship. I'm going to touch on all of these in two different scenarios, in a one-on-one session with Lauren and a young team training environment. We're going to start with the one-on-one scenario where I was coaching Lauren. She's been resistant training for less than a year now, and she's going to prepare for a marathon which is late October. Lauren can be quite self-conscious, and she brought this to my attention in the past and during this session. She mentioned that in the past she didn't like when coaches were giving her too many corrections, hindering her perceived competence. I then realized that I was focusing more on giving her corrections while I wasn't giving much positive feedback. Positive feedback from a Joe could help her change her perception of herself and internalize motivation. She in fact understands the importance of weight training, both from a performance and health perspective, but she struggles to find motivation to do it. So internalized motivation or internalized external motives would be very beneficial for Lauren. This is where positive feedback can have a huge impact, so it will be important to balance corrections with positive feedback. Another way to enhance this aspect is to involve the athlete more in the design of the training program. So while I still have a template with the objectives of the session, I'm asking Lauren which exercises she rather perform to work towards the same goal. As seen in Mazar, there is a positive relation between emotional intelligence and sport performance for female athletes. So being mindful of the way I talk to her and I will give her corrections would be fundamental to help her build confidence and stick to a training regime, while also involving Lauren more in the training design process. Another aspect I notice when training Lauren, and we will touch on that later as well, is the precision of my cues. My experience in the S&C field has been only in an English speaking country, and even the literature I usually go through is in English. I notice that this has an impact on the correctness of my cues. Postgrowth analyzed the impact that the precision of cues has on performance. While the authors were more interested in external and internal focus, the study highlights the importance of finding the correct cue to elicit the desired outcome. It will, it will then be important to phrase cues correctly for my athletes. While I still can get the message across, it is still somewhat difficult to shorten cues to make them more effective, especially while the athletes are performing the exercises. Even if Italian is my first language, I still have to practice it in the S&C environment. Anyway, I noticed that the more I coach athletes, the better my cues become, but nevertheless, it is important to work on this aspect outside the coaching sessions. Related to this aspect, there is also the fact that when correcting athletes, I was beating around the bush to find ways to get the message across, making up long corrections, and also trying to correct too many things at once. Miller argues that we have limited capacity in our working memory, so using long sentences and focusing on too many details can hinder athletes' ability to effectively learn the exercises. So, just to summarize this session with Lauren, I highlighted the importance of balancing positive feedback and corrections to help Lauren correct her form while avoiding hindering her confidence, which highlights the importance of emotional intelligence in the coaching process and can be a powerful tool to build motivation. I then touched on the importance of correct language in order to get the desired outcome during training, and also avoid giving too many corrections at once, as athletes won't have the capacity to implement all the corrections in the next set. Next, we're going to look at the team training session for the under 19 basketball team. As I said before, I recently moved back to Italy, and this was the second or third session with this group. The first thing that I noticed while coaching them were some difficulties in explaining with a precise and concise language. I mentioned this issue before with Lauren. In these clips, you can see me either explaining a new drill or giving them feedback, and it is quite evident that the fact that I sometimes stop explaining when trying to figure out the words. This difficulty can play an important part in getting the message across for sure, but especially in this group, which isn't used to S&C training, can disturb their engagement. This is a big area of improvement for myself as I can enhance my skill as a coach, but especially get my idea across more easily and create a closer relationship. Always relating to this language aspect, it is important to simplify the terminology I use as I realized that I sometimes went too much in details on certain aspects, and I noticed some puzzle looks on their face. For example, I started naming muscles or training methodologies, like plyometrics. It would be better to avoid touching on these aspects when training a big group of youths, especially as they don't have much strength training experience. In this clip, I am coaching them through some speed drills, in particular a march, a skip, and high knee run. After I explained them the exercise, I started giving corrections to individual athletes straight away. Guadagnoli shows that there is an ideal length of summary when giving feedback, which is around 5 trials or reps. These will help athletes better retain what they are learning and also develop a better feeling of the different movements. In order to do so, I believe it is useful to first let them perform the exercise while just observing, then addressing the group's biggest mistake, and lastly, addressing athletes individually. This process of giving them feedback and corrections could also avoid getting them too self-conscious and hinder their learning process. A few times I gave some athletes individual corrections, and while it improved their form straight away, I noticed that they became quite self-aware and some of them were looking around. Maybe this was just an impression I had, but I believe that especially at this age, they can be quite mindful of other teammates, so I should always be careful of how I give them feedback, corrections, and cues. As mentioned before, they haven't been participating in a proper SNC training program, so their engagement level can be quite low. A strategy I have implemented after the first session is asking them questions about what differences they can find while I demonstrate different executions. I have found that it is quite useful in this regard, and as argued by Atkinson, a feedback in the form of a dialogue between supervisor and trainee can improve the response of the trainee to the feedback received. While this study wasn't carried out on athletes, it could be worth to try that also in a sport environment, and it can be a useful tool to again build a better relationship. It is extremely important for this type of athletes to follow a structured program, so building a dialogue can be a great tool to build a strong relationship, keep them engaged, and also build internal motivation. Another aspect that could improve in order to build a better relationship with these athletes is explaining to them the benefits that an SNC program can have. Smith and Small argue that this positive approach can help athletes work on this aspect more willingly. In fact, at the end of the second and third sessions, I had a couple of them coming over to me asking questions about the exercises we have been doing. One last thing that could have been very important in this session is the use of analogies to explain the drills. As argued by Lam, the use of analogies can help athletes perform better during competition with respect to an explicit explanation. These will help them to not choke under pressure when playing matches, and so it will be very relevant to these athletes. It can also be a useful tool to the basketball coach in order to automatize different sport fundamentals. The use of analogies will be something that I have to keep in mind going forward when working with this group. But the few times I have used analogies, I noticed a shift in the athlete's attitude as they were more attentive. So the use of analogies could be a good tool to keep them engaged, but also help the learning process. In this session, we can highlight some key topics. First, the importance of correct language, as explained before, in terms of precision of cues, but also by keeping it simple enough to allow even athletes new to this type of training to understand better what's going on. Then, the importance of delaying feedback to help athletes explore movements and develop a better feeling of different movements. And then, the difficulty of keeping engagement with youth athletes, which can be maintained by asking questions, explain benefits of training, and using analogies. We saw two different scenarios with two different populations. In the first case, we analyzed the one-on-one session and I addressed some main issues. The importance of language and the use of positive feedback, arguing that the main things to improve would be the use of appropriate language and the use of the right amount of positive feedback. This will help getting the message across in a better way and also build a stronger relationship while not hindering the athlete's perceived efficacy. It would also be quite beneficial to involve athletes in the design of training programs in order to get them more involved in a training regime, build motivation, and keep their engagement. I then moved to a team training session with youth athletes. When my language issues remained, other issues appeared. First, it is important to delay feedback in order to help them learn and retain information better. It is important also to keep them engaged. To do so, I started asking them questions and explained the benefits of engaging in an SNC program. I also believe that analogies can be a great tool at the coach's disposal, independent of athletes' age, as they can enhance the learning process, keep athletes engaged, and also have a laugh, all of which can help towards building a better relationship.